I'm Dr. Duke, joined today by Sandy Stotsky. Sandy, the last time we had you on the show, your book had just been released. Give everybody the title of the book and where they can find it, and we'll talk about a recent review.
The title of the book is The Roots of Low Achievement.
And when we talked about your book, we knew it was going to make kind of a splash. You make some really good observations. Your book was just reviewed by Dan Huber, right?
By Dan Huber, yes.
And give us the gist of the review for people listening at home.
The review was, I thought, very on target and useful. It pointed out that what I am recommending is unlikely to ever appeal to education reformers, but that whatever we have been doing does not help disadvantaged kids. And it's a review that suggests that education reform simply hasn't worked, whatever we've done. That he's reviewing what I've said in my book, because I've reviewed all the relevant bodies of research.
Let's take some of those lists. What are some of those common sense solutions that you and others have prescribed that the public school system will never adopt? Give us some examples.
The examples he mentions, one of them is making sure that teachers have the knowledge they need for teaching the subject matter they are expected to teach in their secondary classes. And as he shows, and as I know because I've been involved in teacher training, we have not strengthened academically our teaching corps. That was what I did very purposefully in Massachusetts when I was in the Department of Education from 1999 to 2003.
I can tell you, we just did a story for the Dr. Duke Show about aspiring teachers in Australia not able to pass a basic literacy test to get their teaching credential. They don't know how to read very well. They don't know how to do basic math. Literally in this story that we just broke a couple days ago, Sandy, teachers couldn't figure out how much money they would make weekly from a yearly salary because they didn't even know how many weeks there were in a year.
I'm not surprised that little bits of knowledge like that are no longer expected because of the dismissive attitude that many teacher educators have about anything that could be just, quotes, looked up on a computer or Googled or Yahooed through their search engines. And that is, of course, one of the distressing aspects of so-called, quotes, progressive education, that what you can look up, you don't need to learn or memorize. And this is particularly handicapping in beginning math or arithmetic.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we build knowledge on foundations, right? And if you don't have in your head foundational math, being able to memorize the multiplication tables, for instance, if you don't have that in your head, how are you going to do the higher level math when you can't just look things up? It seems that the education administration really has dropped the ball in terms of the idea that education is a progressively ongoing thing, that you create a set of understandings and ideas, you learn certain material, and then you build on it. What is it about the educational administration in this country that doesn't seem to understand that concept anymore?
They have somehow sold themselves on the view that anything that requires fluency from practice or, say, speed drills in arithmetic is not something that teachers should spend time on in class. I was an amateur pianist, and I know from my involvement with music all my life as an amateur that you have to practice regularly and build up fluency, because you are hobbled if you cannot be quick and accurate with basic foundational material. In music, that might be playing scales quickly, arpeggios quickly, or having your fingers trained so that they do the right things without a conscious signal to do those things because that takes time. And if you have to think through everything, then you will always be behind the time that is really needed to do problem solving of any kind. Fluency must be there in almost every basic subject, and that's what elementary teachers once thought they were responsible for, but this was later seen by teacher educators as something that would cripple interested children. It was something that was never proved, but it was claimed, and that's a good part of our major problems with what is called education reform in the last 50 to 100 years. We simply make claims, but there's no evidence or proof that those claims will do anything.
Yeah, Dan Huber really brought that part of your book out. Another major assertion that you made that would just drive the left nuts is money has very little or nothing to do with improving the schools. That's one of the holy grails of progressive educrats, right? The more money you give us, the better we're going to make your kids. Talk about why that's obviously not true.
That is been shown not to be true by some economists and other researchers who've looked over the years to note, first of all, that more money has been appropriated by the federal government since 1965 or 66, which was when LBJ's war on poverty began, up to even the recent year or two when educators and their supporters claim that they need more money. We've been giving more and more money, and we've bought more non-teaching personnel, as a report came out several years ago from the Friedman Foundation in Missouri, I think it is, that talked about what they found when they looked at the hiring patterns in relation to student achievement. We've dramatically increased the number of people the schools hire, but it doesn't seem to have any relationship to the money that has been going to the schools for 50 and over 50 years, even though there was an expectation that money would solve all problems. But people in the schools, including school committees and others, like the money because the schools have become very expensive to maintain, and testing that is mandated by the USED, Department of Education in Washington, D.C., the testing that is locked into the state plans that are part of ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, which was the latest revision of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that came out of LBJ's administration way back in 1965. 1966 was the Coleman Report that right away told everyone, after an exhaustive, almost 1,000 pages or more, study by an eminent sociologist and graduate students and other colleagues who looked at it. He had looked carefully to see what factors were influential, and he did not find that money made very much of a difference.
I want to let everybody out there know that you gave the information for your book and where they can find it, how they can get it. I want to let everybody know that Dan Huber's review of your book, which really is worthwhile to read, because it goes through all the ways in a very synthesized way that show everything that you're talking about is right and why it's going to be ignored. This is academic questions, right? The Journal of the National Association of Scholars, that's where they can find Dan Huber's review. Let me ask you, Sandy, this is the $64,000 question as far as I'm concerned. Are you going to now write a book that says from beginning to end, this is how you build a successful school? There are a lot of us who would like to see that. How do we go about it? If you were starting a school from scratch, how do you put that school together so it guarantees that our kids are going to read? Are you going to get on that program for us?
I I don't think I can do more than what I did for the whole state of Massachusetts when I was in the Department of Education. We had successive testing that showed kids were improving, but no one else is interested. No one else has ever shown an interest in what I did, because I was the key person in the Department of Ed in charge of revising all standards, revising teacher licensing regulations and licensure tests. I did all that, and no one has even bothered to interview me to find out what I did. I am absolutely flabbergasted. Here I spent day and night, 7 days a week for 4.5, almost 5 years, making all the changes and revisions, tightening up wherever I could to strengthen academically whatever the department did in Massachusetts academically. And then it was all tossed aside when Common Core's standards in '09 were adopted. And right now the department is in the middle of getting rid of all the licensure tests that I helped to influence, even though we know we strengthened teachers by having them take these tests that were part of their licensure process, and the teaching of whatever they did in their education school programs had to conform or be compatible with whatever was in our regulations. That was the first task I was given by the commissioner at the time, David Driscoll, and by Jim Pizer, who was at that time, he's now Secretary of Education under Charles Baker, the governor in Massachusetts. But when Jim Pizer became chairman of the board, he and Driscoll together knew what I was doing, and I was invited or asked or told to simply revise all the things the department did that had academic components. And everything I did was devoted to how do we strengthen the school curriculum? How do we strengthen the teaching core? Given that I didn't have any of higher ed except teacher training programs under my authority. So I've done all that. I'm only saying that no one has ever been interested. No researcher has ever called me up to ask, what did you do in Massachusetts that led to the phenomenal scores that Massachusetts students had on TIMSS test, TIMSS, the Third International Mathematics and Science Survey? What did you do? We were tied in 8th grade science with Singapore, which was first regularly. Its students have done extremely well every time TIMSS testing has been done. And we stopped even using TIMSS as a test, an international test, in the last round of TIMSS testing. NAEP scores show us still in grade 4 and 8 having the highest achieving students in terms of scores in grade 4 and 8 in math and in reading.
I just want to thank you again for your service. Let people know that the book is The Roots of Low Achievement if they want to have a real good read here. And Dan Huber's recent review in Academic Questions is also a gem as well. Sandy, thank you so much for your time today.